So before we begin, I just want to let you know that if you're a musician who records their own music, this is the absolute best time in history. With tools like MIDI drums and amp sims and inexpensive DAWs, you can achieve amazing 100% professional results right in your bedroom, garage, or even living room. The downside is so many people make the same mistakes over and over and over again when using these tools. And this is why I've put together a MIDI drums and amp sims production checklist. In this simple, straightforward PDF guide, I outline the common mistakes that we all make when using MIDI drums and amp sims and how to remedy these issues and get right to achieving better results within your home studio with the gear you currently have. The PDF guide is absolutely free and you can download it right now by clicking the link below in this video subscription. So Kyle asks, if the loudest sword didn't exist and you could make a metal production sound as good as possible without making as loud and compressed as possible, what would be your ideal dynamic range? DR10, DR8, DR10? Dude, I don't even know what DR8 and DR10 is, to be honest with you. I don't worry about it too much, man, because there are great mixes out there. I'm gonna be honest with you. For me, the gold standard are guys like Andy Sneap, where their mixes are loud but not squashed. I go for that. If my mix is comparable as far as apparent volume, I'm happy. I know it's overly simple, but that is my approach. Hopefully that makes sense. Matt Blackwell says, loud enough is loud enough. That's the way I look at it, man. Okay, so Joe says, Joe Hervey84, I guess you were born the same year that I was born in. Modern high gain, METDL, drop C. I got a bunch of high gain amps, tube screamers, noise gates. EQ is my issue and finding the right IR. Dude, if you have the right tone, you shouldn't even worry too much about EQ. That's just my own opinion, my own philosophy. If you have the right impulse response, you could try mine. I have a free one. If you go to any of my YouTube videos where I'm talking about amp sims, you can download it for free. There's a link in most of those description boxes. And that's just my opinion. Same thing when you're miking an amp. If you have the right cab with the right mic placement and the right head with the right player, shouldn't need a lot of EQ. Okay, so redwoodlloyd. Hi, Bobby. I was wondering what was the moment your mixes turned from amateur to professional? Keep up the new channel. It's good. Well, thank you for enjoying the new channel. For anyone who's interested, I started a second YouTube channel that features all of the bands that we produce for our live sessions. Live recording has become something that's I'm really passionate about, and we're producing all independent and local artists in venues, also unexpected venues. I don't want to give anything away. And it's going to bleed over to the channel as well, this channel, where I showcase some of the techniques that I use. But with that being said, back to your question, you never are fully done learning. It never ends. I'm still learning new things. It's an art form. It's like playing guitar, like you're never, or drums, or if you're a vocalist, you're never like, oh, I'm good, that's it. No, you keep learning. It's funny, I've had conversations with bigger producers, and they've all said, man, I didn't even know what I was doing back then. And I'll say, well, you had like a Grammy nominated album back then. You didn't know what you were doing. But let me just say this, if you're looking to record professionally, don't wait for the right time. Just start doing it, right? Just start recording local bands and get out there and start doing it. And if you edit and you are cool to hang out with, you are already ahead of 90% of people, because most people are too lazy to edit and most people lack social skills or something. I don't know what it is, but that's my 2 cents. Thank you for your question. Hi, how do you approach mixing strings within a metal song? Dude, my approach is simple. I just do a lot of automation. There's no magical EQ cut or no magical compression trick. People try to shortcut things by side chaining and all that. And to be honest with you, it's all your own subjective, artistic, the way you specifically as an individual hear things. So for me, if the strings need to take center stage, I'll kind of automate the guitars down a little, not so much that you don't hear the guitars, but enough where the ear is drawn to the strings. So the more complex the production is, the more automation you're going to need to use, and the more layers you have, the more automation you're going to need to use. So when it comes to mixing live strings, that's something that I do a lot of volume automation. Doesn't have anything to do with plugins, does not have anything to do with gear. It just comes down to just taking the time to go in there and do the stuff that most people don't want to do, if I'm being honest with you. That is my approach. Okay, so Kaiser asks, when recording symphonic metal, should there be an EQ dip in the rhythm guitars for the symphonic instruments? No, I do not approach mixing that way. Maybe there are guys or girls that do that, but then your guitars are taking a hit, right? That's the way I see it. A lot of it comes down to simple. I know I sound like a broken record. Volume automation is just making dynamically enough space, room for all of your instruments. Because think about it, a violin is in the mid-range, just like a guitar, just like a snare drum, just like a vocal. So, yeah, you can have your guitars panned and that kind of leaves room in the middle for your vocal and your snare drum, but the strings are going to be fighting with your guitars no matter what you EQ out of them, right? That's my approach. And I've heard of others approaching it the same way. Doug Reese asks, what about panning strings up the middle? It all depends, dude. You have to think of it like this. Think about an orchestra and an actual theater, right? The way that they're kind of spread out naturally, that they're naturally panned in let's say you have a simple orchestra recording that's just 2 microphones. Just hard pan them, a real orchestra recording. Hard pan the strings because the microphones are set up in such a way to capture the actual stereo image of them acoustically in that environment. So that would be the true representation, or close to it, of what actually exists in the real world. That's how I look at it. There's no right way. I can't tell you, pan the cellos here, pan the violins here, pan the flutes here. It all depends. Also, there are no rules, man. It depends on what you want to hear. So I wouldn't overthink it, especially in metal, because in metal, let's be real. Metal comes down to the drums, bass, guitars, and vocals for the most part, and strings are just kind of sprinkles and icing on the cake, in my opinion. Okay, so Ryan asks, when you write automation, do you ever use a hardware fader controller or just use a mouse? Dude, I just use a mouse. The only time I use hardware faders is if I'm doing a front of house gig and I'm using something like an X32. I do like having faders when it's a front, like an actual live show, because it's just quicker, but all my automation is with a mouse. Great question. So Lee says, was talking to a friend today and he said, oh, do you do side chaining, especially for kick and bass? My answer was no. Yeah, man, I know that's popular. No, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are amazing producers that utilize that technique, but I have done it only with super crazy, extremely tight gent where everything is so mechanical and so fake and almost like on the border, almost bordering electronic music. I'll do stuff like that for an extreme kind of effect. But for the stuff that I do, it's more like organic, sort of, right? So I don't really go that direction. For me, just the roll-offs on my EQ and the playing and the way that everything gels together is all I need personally. But that's just my opinion. Okay, so James Dixon asks, when mixing live drums or Easy Drummer for an album, do you mix the drums the same for the same sound or tweak as you go? Good question, man. Generally, here's my process. Let's say I'm doing an album for a band, right? I'll mix one song and I'll get one song completely approved by the band. Usually it's the song that comes together the easiest, and I make sure they are 1,000,000% happy with it. And that song becomes my template for the rest of the album. So that way, everything else is just pretty much little automation moves, little sprinkles here or there, it's just easy after that. So the basic, at least for metal, maybe if I'm doing indie rock album where it's a different drum tuning or different drum set on every song, different story. But for metal, generally it's one drum sound throughout the whole record. It's one main drum sound, and yes, there might be a special effect, like a different reverb for a specific part of a specific song, but for the most part, it's just one drum mix for the whole record, and I get that approved first by the band, so it saves me time, instead of mixing one song or 3 songs at once, and then having the band like the one song and not the other. It just doesn't make sense. That's, in my opinion, that's the most efficient way to do it that I've learned anyway, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we got Effluvia Incorporated. Love your channel tutorials. How are you panning your multiple cymbal spot mics and panning / percentages / recommendations? Great question, man. Here's how I do it. My main 2 crash cymbals, I call my overheads, and I hard pan them. And then for the most part, I'll generally hard pan my ride as well. And I hard pan almost all of my cymbals. Now, if I have a splash up the middle, if the drummer has an actual splash kind of in the middle of the kit and I spot mic the splash, I'll pan that center. If I'm recording a huge drum set, and I mean huge, which is extremely rare, and when I pan the cymbals, they sound weirdly separate, which again is extremely rare, then I might pan them inward. Or if I want the mix to intentionally not sound as big, again, pretty rare, I'll pan them in. But we have to remember that most of these drums are being recorded in small spaces, so you're gonna have so much crosstalk between the cymbals that hard panning is not going to even sound like hard panning, right? Now, if I'm mixing a project that somebody used some weird MIDI drum program that the cymbals sound really oddly separate, then yes, I will pan them in so they don't sound like they're coming from 2 different universes, but that's my approach. If it's real drums that I recorded, I'm almost always hard panning my cymbals. Like in this mix, actually all the drums are LCR, even the toms. I went old school on this mix. Believe it or not, most people don't notice, the original consoles that were stereo, you couldn't pan in between. It was either LCR, and they mixed great records back then, so why can't we? That's my opinion. So Bradzilla says, you've talked about spot mics on cymbals rather than a simple overdub pair. When inputs are limited and the drummer has a forest of cymbals, how do you handle that? Great question, dude. So when I do live recording, like at a venue, I only use 2 overheads, but I don't mic my kit in a traditional sense. When I'm limited with inputs, I'll mic the main crashes away. I try to reject the hi-hat because hi-hats will destroy your mix. They will destroy your mix, and snare will destroy your mix. So I mic the cymbals closer to the edges, about a foot-ish above the cymbals, even if, a traditional engineer will look at my setup and say, what the hell is that? But you know what? I have more control that way because the hi-hat isn't killing me. So that's what I do. Also, I have a new series on YouTube called Frightbox Goes Gorilla, and I'm gonna be recording bands in the most horrible environments with the most limited gear, and I'm gonna be doing a lot of that. So stay tuned on the channel. I think you're gonna learn some stuff. Greg H, what tone do you get down first? Do you get a rhythm guitar tone and then build the rest of your tones around that? Do you do bass first? Just curious where you start when getting complementary tones. Great question. It starts in for me these days, it even starts in pre-production. So right now I'm working with a young band called Raising Arizona, and I already have the tone in my head that I want. I talked to the band about it. We're going for a drier, more British kind of tone. So the amp sims I'm using in the pre-production, I'm kind of going for that Marshall kind of thing. So I think a lot of people, they'll record stuff and then they start worrying about like the tones they're going to use. I try to have a vision for the project before I even set up a single microphone, even before the songs are fully written. I hope that's not too abstract, but that's the God's honest truth. And you'll find that it's generally easier. So if for example, you want a more cushiony boogie, a dual rec kind of tone, and then you can subconsciously start building your pre-production around that, and then eventually your mix around that. It doesn't matter if you're using real amps or amp sims, it's the same concept. So that's how I do it, and it served me well. It actually simplifies the process. Kelly Powers is a good place to start with guitar volumes balanced about 25% less than drums in a rock or metal mix. There's no rule. What I like to do is get my kick sitting at a reference. Usually I like to aim for like negative 18 dB, which is kind of like 0 dB analog-ish, right? And then I build my mix around that. If the guitars are louder to sound right, they're louder. If they're quieter, they're quieter. But I'll tell you this, a lot of the times when people send me their mixes, especially guitar players, we are the worst. We make our guitars way too loud. Always reference a pro mix and see where their guitars are sitting alongside the snare drum. That's usually the dead giveaway. Like if your snare drum is buried and your guitars are super, then you're probably too loud. If your snare drum is poking through the mix and you can't make out the riffs, then your guitars are probably too buried. So that's my approach.